Former Prime Minister David Cameron's been formally introduced into the House of Lords.
Witness ourself at Westminster, the 17th day of November, in the second year of our reign. By warrant, under the King's sign manual.
I, David, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton takes his place in the upper house, allowing him to serve in Rishi Sunak's cabinet as Foreign Secretary. Speaking in the last half hour at the Global Food Security Summit, Lord Cameron reflected on a very special day and stressed the importance of foreign aid.
I've had an extraordinary day going to the House of Lords and doing all the right things and nodding and saying the oath and all the rest of it, so I can go home and tell Mrs Cameron, she's now Lady Cameron, she's absolutely furious about that. This government has a proud record on development. I'm proud of what we did on development, and I'm determined that we put development right back at the heart of our Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. It is so important.
Still with me in the studio, TalkTV chief political commentator Peter Cardwell, and not Lord Cardwell yet, but imminently, I'm quite certain. Also joining me, former advisor to David Cameron Phillip Blond, and journalist Michael Crick. Good to have you on board. Let's talk to Philip first. Obviously, this is a kind of technical matter. He couldn't be Foreign Secretary were he not ennobled so gloriously. But it's interesting that he says that his wife, Samantha, will be furious not to be Mrs Cameron, but to be Lady Cameron. Is that true?
I'm sure it's not, but you know, the British love depreciation. So if you can make remarks like that, the audience always laughs. So it's just good manners, and we can't take that away from the former Prime Minister. So I think it was well said, and well, now he's a Lord and Foreign Secretary.
I mean, we know that there was universal surprise, not to mention shock, when he strolled so confidently and so very slowly and in such a statesmanlike manner towards 10 Downing Street. You know, seasoned politicos who always think they know everything in advance were taken entirely unawares. There was barely a photographer present to record the extraordinary scene. And I wonder what you think. Were you as surprised as everyone else? Did you believe that David Cameron was happy in a shepherd's hut, writing his memoirs and doing a bit of political lobbying? Did you ever think he'd make an appearance on the world stage in this way again?
Oh, definitely. You know, it's common knowledge he was bored to tears, and he left politics at a relatively young age, and I'm sure now it's a stepping stone for further advancement into sort of something like the UN. I'm sure that's kind of how he had hoped it might go. But it's quite a return given the scandal of his interregnum, if I can put it like that, going from Green Seal to lobbying for Chinese companies. So it's quite a recovery. But I think what was really surprising was the strategy of the Sunak administration, because it's obviously turning back on the 2019 electorate. It's making the Cameroonian or liberal wing of the Conservative Party the central governing faction. That's provoked an enormous amount of antagonism and anxiety on the socially conservative right and on the free marketeer right, if I can put it like that. So it's as if he's giving up the northern seats for securing Sussex and Surrey. And I'm not sure that's a particularly wise strategic approach, to be honest with you. That's the real surprise.
I mean, we were hearing at the COVID inquiry, Philip, about Boris's scientific shortcomings, and we had, it pointed out to us that he'd left the science classes at the age of 15 and never bothered with science ever since, and found it quite difficult to read a graph. When we look at David Cameron's achievements in foreign policy, they don't make a particularly edifying list, really. And I wonder whether you think he has it in him to be a terrifically good foreign secretary, and if you were advising him still, what advice you would give him now?
Well, you're right. I mean, his record, anything from the defeat of Brexit to the George Osborne-induced golden age, where they were trying to embrace Chinese expansion, doesn't read well from the perspective of a few years later. But I don't think you can take away his charm, his gravitas, or his connections. He's got a massive social cachet that matters in the world. He's got far more traction as foreign secretary than almost any other figure. So I think in terms of this job, I think he will do very well. But it's a bit like having too much weight on one side of the ship, if you can forgive the metaphor, because with his statements about international aid and all of this sort of unbalances the Conservative Party, which is a coalition and an increasingly unstable coalition of interests, and makes the platform or the boat rather that Sunak's trying to steer into. Well, it's not exactly clear what port he's trying to steer it to, but he's definitely trying to get control of the vessel. It makes it more difficult. And so I think Cameron will be a destabilising factor for the Conservative Party. And rather than securing the party in its home county seats, will lead to further fracture and political rupture in the not too distant future.
Gosh, and when you say he has tremendous social cachet, do you mean he's an old Etonian? Is that really what you mean? Is that a euphemism for old Etonian?
No, it's not. Lots of people have tremendous social cachet, and they can, and that often comes from not going to Eton. But in the sense of, charisma and personality matters in politics. If you look at the American elections, one of the reasons DeSantis couldn't carry through his kind of position vis-a-vis Trump is he doesn't have the charisma. Charisma matters. It's underanalyzed by historians because they can't cope with it because it's a particular quality rather than a universal dimension, but it's real. And Cameron does have that, and that does matter in terms of soft power. And I think I always believe in trying to describe reality, and I think it's clear that he has a lot of cachet and a lot of power for the job, for want of a better expression.
Well, thank you. Let me bring in Mr. Charisma himself, Michael Crick. Now, Michael, it takes one to know one. Obviously, you're sitting there veritably oozing charisma and projecting it right through the screen at me. It's even more evident when you're in the studio with me. I miss you today. You said something very similar to what Phillip Blond said the other day. You said, well, David Cameron was at a loose end, he had to do something, and he wasn't really excelling at the things he was having a good bash at doing, like lobbying and stuff. So, why not make him Foreign Secretary? You did kind of say that, didn't you?
I did. And first of all, let me say that I don't have charisma. I have what's known as charisma. But no, you're right, Vanessa. You're both right, Philip and Vanessa. And, it wasn't just that he was at a loose end. And, of course, there's not many jobs on the world stage you can do. And, of course, all the European jobs you can't do anymore if you're from this country. But also, he left, under a bit of a cloud with the Brexit result. And then, of course, the problems that have been had since then. And I think part of the reason he's taken this job is to sort of re-establish his reputation, his name. The trouble is he's only got a year in the job, if we're being realistic about it. And I think he's got to concentrate, obviously, as he already has done, on Ukraine. Anything he can do in terms of the Middle East, although that's difficult these days. We are no longer the power that we were in the Middle East. And also, I think the interesting thing is the issue he's was speaking about today, and that is overseas aid. He was very upset when the government, after his term of office, I can't even remember which prime minister it was, reduced foreign aid down below the 0.7% that he had been committed to and indeed changed the law for in his premiership. And of course, the man in the Commons who will be speaking for him, Andrew Mitchell, is a great champion of overseas aid and was greatly distressed as well when we cut overseas aid. So he will be pushing for that within the government. And of course, the thing from Cameron's point of view is he can almost say what he likes because he's unsackable. There's no way in which Sunak can sack him in the way that he did with Suella Braverman for speaking out of line. So he's got a fair bit of clout in that regard, and he will make it clear that as far as he's concerned, there's no question of us leaving the European Convention of Human Rights, which of course those on the right would like us to do for a number of reasons, not least a way of tackling the whole issue of the small boats. So it is a fascinating situation. I'm amazed, though, he took the title Chipping Norton. Chipping Norton was associated, you'll remember, with the Chipping Norton set and Rebecca Brooks and Murdoch and all of that. Even I've actually lived in that part of the world for a while myself. I would have said Lord Cameron of Witney if I were him. That was the name of his constituency, and it's not so sleazy. Also, these days, Chipping Norton's got 3 Labour councillors. I'm not sure whether he took account of that. It's not really a Conservative town anymore.
Let me bring Peter Cardwell in. Peter, as Michael says, fascinating. It really is. He'll probably have a year in the job. He's at a loose end. He's oozing cachet. He's considered to be a statesman, even though he made an absolute bish of everything, really, it seemed, and left under a cloud. I mean, what a renaissance. Phoenix-like.
Well, it is Phoenix-like, but also I think there are problems ahead. I think it's very difficult for someone who's run a government but never actually run a department. This is only a second job in government, of course, to be second fiddle. We've already seen a few times when he's been talking about that foreign aid budget, for example, saying today that he wants to put it at the centre of things. That is not the message of Rishi Sunak or of the former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. It was actually in 2021, and we're talking about spending reviews, was Rishi Sunak as Chancellor in 2021 in his spending review that he reduced from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP, what the country makes, basically, to give in foreign aid. So it was under Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But if David Cameron wants to get that back, is that the price of him coming back as Foreign Secretary? We'll find out maybe on Wednesday or perhaps in the budget coming through. But yes, he's got about a year. We'll see what he ends up doing. And yes, this will probably be his second, but perhaps not his last job in politics. He was the future once. Could he be again?
And will he be much less interested in how it's playing to the gallery than Rishi Sunak?
Well, he's got very little to prove, and also it's not his head on the block. If the Conservatives lose the next election, I don't think they're going to blame David Cameron. They'll blame Rishi Sunak. So he can get away with more. He's a sort of elder statesman who's come in to slightly rescue Rishi Sunak, or that's perhaps how Rishi Sunak sees things. So things are a bit different. The dynamic is a different one. Also, Rishi Sunak, let's remember, was only an MP from 2015. He didn't even have the lowest possible rank of a ministerial bag carrier when David Cameron was Prime Minister. So this is something he's working with someone who is a lot less experienced than he is, and David Cameron has probably the upper hand in a number of respects.